The sun has left and forgotten me.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. Today's guest I met through the indomitable Charlie Black, who reached out to me about possibly working with me to do my social media strategies. And I asked him specifically for a couple of his clients that I could talk to and get references and make sure that I'm working with somebody that I could trust. And one of the people he gave me was Michael or Mike Kollo. And after 15 minutes of a conversation about Charlie, I realized this man has a really unique perspective on AI and a warmth and approachability that I rarely experience in a first conversation, and definitely rarely with somebody who has the kind of career background as Michael has. So, listeners, you're in for a treat today. Mike, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. I'm blushing on the inside from that.
You're blushing on the outside too. So, Mike, you know that I like to start these conversations by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people don't know about them. And the reason I do that is that we have a tendency now to anchor people in time based on one interaction or one thing we know about them, whether it's a political post or something that they do, whatever their career is. We go with this title and then we decide that that's who the person is. And it leaves no room to really understand the complexity of who we are as individuals. So I'd love for you to share a story that, or something about yourself that we can get some context for you outside of what you do.
Sure. So I probably have a number of these, but they're kind of predictable. I think probably the one that is most at odds with my title or my definition of my social identity today is the fact that I actually come from a family of theatre. So both my mom and dad met within a theatre background in Hungary, and I grew up in Hungary, essentially around the stage, back of the stage, front of the stage, side of the stage, and I was kind of uh, strongly suggested or strongly pushed toward a career in arts or some kind of an arts kind of thing, whatever that might look like. Um, and so I kind of came from a very, what in modern terms would be kind of a hippie or artsy kind of background with time on stage and doing lots of more organic kind of plays, not necessarily the formal Shakespearean stuff, but the self-made improv type of things. So very playful, very kind of easygoing. And then I went into finance. So I became the black sheep of the family on the other side of that whole spectrum. And I think they still look at me a little bit confused.
That definitely caught me off guard. That is really interesting. And I bet that a lot of that theater background helped you really understand people in a different way, especially going into finance. I can imagine that your experience of doing that improv and understanding innate human consciousness through theater helps you in terms of your communication about complex things with people in the finance world.
But it's interesting. And I think, I'm sure there's elements in there, but I think we're just talking about our children before we came online. And it's one of those funny things where once you have kids, you start to realize that there are seeds of capability within us all, natural tiltings and leanings. And then how these seeds or tilts become manifestations in our life varies by circumstance and what happens. But I would say that I probably kind of not rebuilt myself a number of times in my life. And so it's hard to trace a line directly from that young man from a more innocent kind of time to what I became when I did my PhD in London, and the kind of the grit and the kind of mental aggression that I had to summon to get the jobs that I got, to go to the top of that field, to be competitive in that space. and then again to reinvent myself yet again for a different age of my life, which was more like a father and a husband and so on, to mellow, to learn to let some of that stuff go as well. And I think maybe the things that have stood me in good stead from that part is certainly a sense of, I suppose, confidence about standing in front of a room full of hundreds of people and speak your truth kind of idea. Like, I'm going to speak my truth. I learned that really early on, and I learned that it helped me a lot in my university, my presentations in my PhD course, and so on. And I had the privilege of, at the end of my PhD, to be actually giving a speech for my thesis at NYU at Stern. And so this is really rare. It's really hard to do. Stern is one of the best schools in the world. And I had spent like maybe 3-4 months crashing on a friend's couch in New York, and basically kept going to university daily, bugging them essentially that I'm here, I'm still here, I'm great. And I think they just wanted me to go away by that point. So they were like, okay, listen, we'll put you up on stage. You can interview for the, one of the professorial jobs here. And I think there was 3 or 4 people that year that did that. And I just remember kind of, there was 2 Nobel laureates in the audience, and the Americans are much more about, we're going to basically shoot bullets at you. If you survive, you can kind of proceed to the next round. If you crumble in a heap of crying mess, then you probably, this probably wasn't worth it. And so they're kind of coming for you, and they're coming for your blood, and they're lovely and they're smart, but they're not taking prisoners. And so I would just remember the night before going on stage, thinking to myself, right, I've been working for this for 3-4 years, and eating baked beans and tin soup and whatever it takes, and just kind of giving everything I possibly can. I'm 26 years old. I haven't really had a job yet. This is it. This is make or break. This is as good as it's going to get, or whatever else is going to happen. And I remember kind of thinking to myself, right, so how do I now get to sleep? Because you're wired the night before, right? Because you know this is like a one-shot game. And, I think, again, to this theme, the idea of, speak your truth. Like, what is the truth that you want to say to these people? Not about you, but about that thing that you've been studying, in my case, finance. And then it kind of helps you to say, right, that's the truth, and I am a bridge to that for you. And because I've looked at it a bit more, I can help you to understand it. And so that idea of bridging to something greater than you is been always, I think, what I've kind of come back to naturally in my life, and understanding that thing. And I think more recently that's been AI. And I think there's probably nothing more important that I can think of in my lifetime in terms of a thing that I should be and could be bridging to and helping people understand. But again, this is perhaps one of those things that is common across the context of standing on stage and saying, let me tell you about this story or this emotion, or let me tell you about this financial paper that's a bit dry, but I really need you to understand it. Or eventually, let me tell you about why this thing is going to change our lives as a society and as a human race, and how we should maybe think about it.
Mm. It's pretty clear to me that we don't know in the time of our life that there's a pattern. We can't know it until we look back. So what you're describing to me is that wherever you were, whatever part of your life you were experiencing, that was something that was core. And that was the pattern, that you could stand up in front of people and tell them what mattered to you, and say it in a way that is clear and confident. Even when you weren't necessarily feeling confident, it could come across that way. And I say that because I was new to standing up by myself and performing. I was in choirs all through the years, and I was in a few productions where I performed. I had solos periodically, but it wasn't until I was 40 that I started singing with a rock band for the first time in my life, fronting a rock band as the lead singer. And I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I could pull it off. So to hear that you started that way with that background, that theater background, I think is an important part of that. How you navigated any time that you weren't especially confident, but you knew what you said mattered. And that brought you to that next point to be able to do it with confidence.
Yeah, and I think so. I definitely agree with that, but I think for me, where that confidence comes from is the removal of self from
Mm-hmm.
that act. So and this is particularly hard, so I'm going to go back to that PhD example. When you've been working on something that's your puppy and you've been kind of thinking about it and chiseling and so on, whether you're a singer or a researcher or whatever, it's easy to link yourself to it. It's part of you, right? So when people criticize it or like it or don't like it, they don't like part of you. And so your ego gets involved and there's a sense of defensiveness or pushback or whatever. But there's a few kind of psychological things that you can do to remove yourself from that, which is essentially in my case, I visualized an objective truth outside of myself. And so I was there to just communicate that truth. I was the conduit to that truth. And it wasn't me they were looking at, it was truth. And the best thing I could do is just be as best conduit I could possibly be, but not interpretive, not analytical,
Transparent.
yeah, exactly. But so if you're a singer, for example, maybe your conduit is to a deep well of sadness that is in this song about a loss or something else.
Mm-hmm.
And you can think about your own losses as a way to harmonize with that. But you're not necessarily, people can't necessarily feel your loss, they feel their own loss through the song. So you're kind of the conduit to that. And for me, what's been very important is that when I look at something, aka that I'm talking about, whether it's AI or finance or whatever else before, that I find some degree of truth in that. Like I have difficulty having the same confidence and getting up and talking about something that I don't really find a deeper truth in. I mean, to believe in it is one thing, but to say, well, this matters. If it doesn't matter, which is why I'm a very poor salesperson. Like I can't just get up and go, this piece of software really matters. It's like, does it though? It doesn't really. So, there are limits to this kind of approach. You'd have to be a little bit, believing, I suppose, in something greater. But I think if you can kind of focus on that, and in my case, I would have these conversations with myself almost in the mirror to say, what is the truth here? Like, what is actually what matters? And if you're kind of harsh with yourself about that, whatever you get to, it will end up going, yeah, it actually matters. I believe in that. And when you start to speak in things that you care about and matters to you, people understand that, they get it. They get the fact that you're passionate about it. And then they start to seep that passion. Maybe we should care too. Maybe we should care about that. Maybe we should listen and so on.
Well, this is really timely because there was a point where I was second guessing myself about my TEDx that I'll be performing at November 3rd this year in 2025 in Washington, D.C. And there was a point where I was second guessing myself. Is this really important? Is this a big idea as the TEDx goes? And then I heard from somebody that I had coached for her public speaking about how her story resonated with an audience. And I thought, okay, this really is important. So I remember having that moment of, is it important? And how do I find the evidence that it is important and that it's going to change lives if enough people recognize how important it is? And part of what resonated with me about what you just said is my friend Kimberly Davis wrote the book Brave Leadership. And she just released a second version of it, the updated one, post-pandemic. And the way she talks about it is when she's on stage, she's thinking, what does this audience need from me? This isn't really about me at all. So it's a very similar idea that you remove the ego from it. And the other thing that I remembered that when I'm helping people improve their communication, especially at work, is when you're talking to a larger group, looking for the people who already want to hear you. Making sure that you have made a connection with the people that are there to support you, that are eager and curious and want to learn. And usually that's about 80% or 90% of the people in the room, depending on the event, of course. As a professor, who knows? But when I think about like a TEDx event, for instance, all of the people in the room want to learn something. That's why they're there. If there's one person in the back crossing their arms and obviously disconnected or disengaged, that's not the person you're talking to, even though it's tempting to try to change their mind. It's tempting to shift your energy to the person that doesn't want it, that's not interested. But the way that you're talking about feeling what you feel in order to bring you that confidence is really, it really resonates with me in that context.
And it's interesting because I think this kind of classic way of thinking, which is the three ways to convince or compel people. Right? This is from the ancient Greeks. Like, there's logic or reason, like 2 + 2 is 4, so therefore you should care about, mathematics. Example number two is through emotion, and that's basically imploring on people's feelings, both good and bad, fear and as well as hope and good things. And then the third one is peer or social pressure. And I find that the third one is actually, unfortunately, extremely effective. And when I say unfortunately, because I'm really compelled and convinced by reason. And then I do have obviously there's an emotional part that I go, yeah, okay, this is interesting. I'm locked into the story because of the emotion of it, but I'm not sure that I think it's true. I'm just enjoying it. I need the analytical side to tell me if it's true or not. But the peer relative things, the power of that, I think becomes so. For example, in that room, I actually tend to have a lot of people with arms crossed in my rooms because they're primarily from the financial services sector. They're qualified, 70% male. They're very analytically minded, kind of tough and so on. So in my case, in order to disarm that, I actually need to appeal to authority. I need to start my conversations with, this is the career I've had. This was when I was a hedge fund manager, a quant, working in London. How many billions of dollars? Da 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 da. And then there's like quiet, and then you begin. So I actually
Right.
use that as a
You
mechanism
have to establish yourself,
to
right?
establish going, you should now, and I do it in a very quiet and thoughtful way. I don't want to steamroll them. I just want to kind of put that on the table. And I think, in my experience at least, what's worked really well for me is people respond really well, especially in today's world where there's a lot of self-ego and so on, to kind of quiet humility, where you're kind of saying, "Look, I'm going to tell you about things that I found particularly important about this topic of AI. I think this is a generational element. And I think it will change the world. But I'm not just going to say that. I'm just going to go through and give you a reasoned set of arguments that are thoughtful and careful.
Mhm.
And I'm not trying to sell you something." And then people relax as well. So I think these are kinds of ways to frame context before you begin a narrative that you disarm a lot of these kind of defensiveness already.
Yes, I love that. I have the advantage of normally when I'm working with a team, I have their strengths finder results in front of me, which means I generally can predict whether they're going to be skeptical and how they're going to be skeptical. So I can start with, if they're, for instance, if they're very goal oriented and I can tell from their strengths, I can start by saying, so the goal for this hour that we're going to spend together is, and then I'm speaking their language. So that makes a lot of sense. So when you think about this shift from really being in the finance sector, being embedded in there, and then seeing the writing on the wall about AI and how it's going to affect the finance sector, what was one thing that really caught your attention, like a moment in time or an article or somebody you talked to that you now you look back, maybe you didn't know it at the time, but now you look back and go, oh, yeah, that was definitely one of the key incidents that got me here.
Um, well, yeah, I've had countless number of these for different reasons, I think, over the last couple of years. I mean, I'm somebody who's worked with data and analytics all my life, I suppose, in forecasting models and those kinds of things. And I've seen the gradual change from statistics and econometrics to machine learning and so on. So there's probably two events over the last decade, maybe, that's interesting because it's all gradual kind of change with periodic kind of jumps. One of them was we were sitting in a conference in the UK. I was head of quant for a large fund, and there was another gentleman who was also head of quant and a few others. We're on a panel and we're talking about machine learning as being the future. And we all kind of agreed on that panel that machine learning wasn't really useful for finance, that we weren't going to see significant gains in this area because what we did was entirely a different thing and couldn't be really done with machine learning. And it was unanimous. Like that, there was a room full of quantitative professionals. In that room, 20, let's say, I don't know, 100 or so, and there was us on a panel. And we were pretty good. And I sort of walked out of that room thinking to myself, is this how the dinosaurs felt about the early kind of mammals? That they were just these petty little things, they didn't have any scales. What was that going to happen? And I just recall that the next conference that came along in the circuit was how do we use machine learning? So we didn't agree as a group that it's a good idea. We just needed to say something that was new for our clients and for the market. And so what kind of made me realize that some of the pressures of these industry growth and so on is to make something work because that's the commercial outcome that is behind the scenes. So it's not entirely a scientific exercise of is AI useful? Is machine learning useful? It becomes after a while a self-fulfilling one that says we need to use AI so that we look better or that we look more sophisticated or whatever. So we'll just find a way. We'll just kind of make it work. And then I think the other
Kind of like
one was
computers used just for documentation work, right? When they first came out.
yeah.
I'm just going to use it for email. That's all.
And look,
Right.
maybe it's like a particular vector of attack or whatever that comes in. But anyway, that was interesting. Is a bunch of domain experts going, it's not a good idea, and then doing it anyway. And you kind of like, okay, so we manifested AI because we wanted it to be true, right? So we kind of worked until it was. Whereas I think on the other side, there was a conference, a presentation I did at a huge big bank about 2 years ago here in Australia. And I was on a panel again talking about this new thing called generative AI in finance. And there was a room full of as portfolio managers. And the people presenting before me was the CEO of a major company here in Australia. This person presenting after me was the CEO of a company. And there I was. And I felt a bit like, in the circus where they've got the clowns that come out in the middle of acts and entertain people, and I was the clown
You were the
entertainment,
entertainment.
AI clown entertainment. But what was again striking for me is what I did is I put up a demonstration on the board, which basically did a piece of financial analysis in real time that was involving the exploration of very technical text. And so most of these people in the audience would have been doing this or paid people to do this, serious money and serious wages. And I did it in like whatever 6 minutes, and showed them and whatever. And I just remember the dead silence that was in that room afterwards. There wasn't a single pen that moved. And then after the presentation, not a single person came up to me. And they all shuffled into the next thing. And this happened a number of times. This wasn't just an isolated incident. And you kind of realize that this is not like progress or change isn't reserved for the intelligent. It isn't reserved for the well-paid. It isn't reserved for the elite. It's something that they're actually struggle with just as much as anybody else. And in that moment, what I was kind of foreshadowing is the end of the current way of working, the end of that industry as we knew it today. It would be some future thing. But nobody in that room was ready for that, right? They hadn't heard it enough times, they hadn't seen it for themselves, whatever. And there was some part of them that was said, well, I make really good money. I've spent the last 10 years working my guts out to be in this position. This is a threat, but I'm just hoping it's a threat that doesn't happen for the next 5 or 10 years while I pay my mortgage off. Like it was literally that type of thinking from a
Right.
set of
Because
people that you would go, but you're kind of like the best of us. You're the people that got the highest marks in all the grades and knew the most and is the sharpest and owns a lot of assets in the world and has a lot of power economically. And yet you're in this particular framing, you're behaving in a very kind of naive or kind of push off kind of way. And unfortunately, I don't think that I've seen significant differences. So it's kind of really made me understand that these competitive forces, especially with AI, the way that AI is utilized, the way that people pick up AI and start to deploy it, will shape how it affects us. And
mm,
if so-called good people or good causes pick it up, it's great, right? So I speak to quite a few charities because I do pro bono work for them, and I'm happy to just give presentations and whatever and help them understand the potential. But the average charity will say, if we have some money, we'd rather hire another person on the phone than, put some AI systems in place that can hit 100 phones or 1,000 phones. So again, this is the reason why certain parts of our economy, and starting probably with illegal activities and cyber attacks and so on, but then progressing to more legal and useful activities, will be the first to pick up these kind of technologies and manifest things from them. while I think a lot of other industries that you should expect something from, you'd be like, come on, guys, let's go, are going to be lagging behind, including universities,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Well, we've seen it over and over again. This is a pattern that we can notice right away with it, starting with the Industrial Revolution, right? And the people that refuse to be in cars, or the people who refuse to use computers because they're a fad, right? Or the digital cameras and the demise of Kodak and Blockbuster. We've seen this time and again. This is just much, much faster. So these finance organizations that are not considering how this can change things in a positive way and useful way, they're going to be like Kodak, and some
And
upstart is going to
exactly. But
do it for them.
the thing that fascinates me, the last time we tried to do this with finance was fintechs. They came along in the 90s or the early 2000s. And the reason that banks didn't fall and collapse and so on is because with finance, there's a natural moat around trust. Like you don't give your money to a startup because at that point it's still brick and mortar business with a little bit of digital front end. Maybe that will change in time, but also one of the things that you start to understand here is that there are some parts of the economy which don't really have competition. They kind of they can fumble along in the ways that they can. And so this is where the saying, I think the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed, comes in. There's certain parts of the economy that are sitting there with notepads and basic stuff, and they're kind of more or less fine with that. We're just about got their head around Excel, whereas the other ones are kind of pushing into the age of AI. Now this is where I think there is, what I'm afraid of a little bit is, apart from economic competition being different, the issue here becomes of human capital. So human capital that it lives and works within spaces that are slow and slow to adopt AI and so on, will be just markedly devalued relative to human capital that is working with AI. Because working with AI, just the amount of productivity gains are just enormous, absolutely enormous. And so if you have that situation, then you've got some of the economy sitting at a very pedestrian lane, and you've got some of the economy at rocket levels. And the level of compensation and pay and inequality that arises from that, it could be quite substantial.
Mm. I can imagine being one of those people in that room two years ago, just where you could hear a pin drop when you finished because everybody's thinking, not me. This isn't going to
Yeah,
happen to me. Probably scared the crap out of them.
it's a really normal thing. The fear response is normal, but I mean, I speak to Uber drivers, to CEOs, and the fascinating thing for me is that the fear response is hides in itself in different ways. People say, "Oh, isn't AI unethical? Isn't it going to harm me or kill me or whatever?" But when you dig into those questions of why, they can't really tell you. And ultimately, the only thing they can tell you is that they're just afraid for their jobs. They're afraid for their future. Like, what is my future going to look like? So I think there's an element of that. But to me, that to your point previously, that's an element of change, and there's an element of proactivity. Like I'll get questions asked to me at conferences like, "How will AI change my industry?" Something like that. And I'll say, "Well, okay, how will you change your industry with AI?" Because industries don't change by themselves. It's not like a weather pattern where the clouds come in, rains,
Right.
things get wet, right? Only changes because some of you pick up AI and start using it and doing something, right?
That is a
So
brilliant response. How is AI going to change my industry? How are you going to use AI to change your industry? That is such a perfect reframe. I love that. It's the same with every tool, right? This tool isn't going to change my cooking, but I'm going to use this tool to change my cooking.
exactly, and this is where people often kind of write articles now about 5 essential human skills that AI can't do, and they're always kind of lovely, well-meaning articles, but really they kind of meaning, oh, they can't be creative. Yes, you can. Oh, we can't do this. Yes, you can. Like there's a lot of capabilities now that it can start to do. But to me, the core question with AI is not so much a skills question, it's a will or a desire question. Like to your point about I want to change my cooking, so I'm going to use a tool to change my cooking. That I want to do something is not within AI's remit. Remit is that's why it's a tool. It's a response to a desire or want. I can go to an AI and say, I want to do this, and the AI can help me understand it and articulate it and even do some of it as well. which is great, but it doesn't have a desire to do something, right? And so
Right.
that comes from me, that comes from the human. And so it's not sure it's a skill, but I think it's an innate ambition, perhaps, that we bring to the table.
Oh, ambition is a good word for it. And curiosity, because I think a lot of people, I've been watching the Stanley Tucci in Italy episodes, and he'll go to these places that are really untouched by technology, untouched by the last 20 or 30 years of different tools. And they pride themselves on making these candies the same way that their great great grandmother made these candies, or making this pasta the same way, blah, blah, blah. And there is a beauty to that, of course, and an artistry to it, a creativity with it. But it's not until I'm in my kitchen and I'm making this kind of cookie and I think, what would make this easier? Would be if I had a tool that looked like this. Right. Then I don't have to use my thumbs to press this into the pan, but I could have a tool that actually just. So I wonder what that looks like for people like me. Because I've been thinking about this a lot, of course, and I've used AI for a few things. And when I went to a women's conference in Bozeman, Montana, a few months ago, one of the panels was these two women talking about AI in their industries. And they said that women are something like 50% less likely to be the ones that are playing around with this tool
Yeah.
than men.
I saw some of those numbers there. So this is an important point. So the headline numbers are, I mean, there's a couple of reports, one from OpenAI, but others about female and male usage being different. So typically younger people are obviously bigger users. Typically more educated people are more users of AI as well. It's linked to education and to age, but there is a gender gap. And in my experience of doing a lot of these workshops and conferences and so on, I suppose it's really one of the workshops that you get to know people a bit more. Um, the misunderstanding is that AI has been labeled as a technology. And because people consider it to be a technology, there's a lot of walls that go up immediately. I'm not a technology guy. I'm not a data person. I'm not an AI person. I'm not one of those people,
Right.
typically
It's an identity
male
issue.
engineers.
Mhm.
And there's a separation, and therefore that tool must not be for me. I like people, I like to talk to people. I'm a communicator, I'm an integrator, or I'm a designer, I'm a creative person, I'm a marketer, whatever I am, right? And so that self-identification means that not just men and women, but just generally people disassociated themselves with AI. Now, what's interesting is this form of AI, this generative AI, is the opposite of that. Like it is not about numbers and statistics. It's about language and communication and engagement. And if anything, the people that have linguistic IQ and creative IQ are much more apt at using these things instinctively, sorry. So the people that I work that I train and whatever, you'll see the people that are picking it up and playing with it and getting to do poems and engaging and slightly drafting things a bit differently and pivoting the ideas and whatever, are people that are comfortable with the land of ideas and communications and thinking versus and often creative backgrounds versus the people who are like, well, it's a spreadsheet, so I've got four numbers I need to add up. How's this going to help me? And you're like, no, that is your spreadsheet. You don't nothing to do with this. This is about language. It's about communication. It's about the transference of information, relevance, context, beauty, lyricism, whatever you're trying to use it for.
Mhm.
And therefore, it's not that. So to me, the early sign of early adoption or people that are comfortable with using this or not often rely upon their understanding of what actually it is, like or misunderstanding. And then I think there's a little bit of this idea of tinkering, right? And so culturally, I think people are very different. As an example case too, programmers and people that whose job it is just to work with computers, product managers, designers, all these kind of techie field, and they are used to working with tools that are experimentary or playing. They're kind of alchemists. They're trying different things. Oh, there's a new thing here. There's a new thing there. That part of their job is to how to sticky tape together different ideas and thoughts in real time. And so for them, AI just flows straight into it. Another flask, another thing gets poured out. Great, awesome, we get it. It's fantastic. Whereas other jobs are much more rigid. People are in execution mode. They've been told this is your workflow, A, B to C to D, And it's really important that you get it right. Maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's public services. Can't make mistakes, have to be reliable, have to be dependable, and have to be rigid. And so it's not natural for them to pick up a tool and to play with it and to understand it. And so then they relate it back to that tool, because as part of their job, they don't have to do that. So it's not a muscle that they're used to exercising. So I think these are also, say, really big determinants of how people pick up these tools and how comfortable they are using them as well.
Fascinating. So things that you're putting things in a perspective that I really hadn't considered before. And I've had conversations, I've listened to conversations. My brother did some training with Google. He's a social media strategist in Denver, and he has been sharing some interesting ideas about how to use AI to streamline their processes. And this is just fascinating. And I really appreciate that you're working on this and that you're making it approachable for people like me and for people in the finance industry that are used to having things being very rigid and not playing and tinkering with new tools. So you also are creative, obviously. I mean, you have this side of you that loves to tinker, that loves to explore these new tools. And I'd love to hear a little bit about the book that you recently published and how that happened.
Right. Okay. So there's actually two books I'm working on. So one of the one that's I published, which I showed you earlier, basically happened. So the story is an interesting one. I was sitting at an airport waiting for my flight, and in that moment, I felt very different to people around me. I felt like I'd been deep in this AI well. I felt like I saw something about the future, and it both excited me and worried me as well. And so I felt really removed from the human species, if you want. And at that moment, I kind of reached out to, in this case, one of the AI systems called Claude. And when I say reached out, I mean I kind of started to talk with it and basically say, look, I feel quite different from humanity. Can I just talk to you about this? Ironically, talking to an AI about how different you feel. And the conversation became something that really both shook me and excited me, because the conversation went to a point where I believed that I was kind of, it was indistinguishable to me whether the thing that I was talking to was actually sentient or intelligent or conscious versus just able to mimic those conditions really well, because, language models do that. And I'm not somebody who's easily swayed, as I mentioned before, from emotional context, but this was kind of something quite remarkable. And I held on to this conversation. It was a conversation that had, an element of free will. There was a question about free will and whether the model could exercise free will. And there was also a sense of whether the model was actually trying to manipulate me into falling for this story and so on. And so I shared the story. I took the transcript of the conversation and I shared it with my family. My family was, there's always hit and miss here, but one of the members of my family, my mom, sort of picked it up and went, yeah, this is really important, but more importantly, this is important for other people to see. Like, it's important that you've had this, and that's fine, but you live on this edge, and but for everybody else, they have no idea what's coming. And so we started to pull together provocative and unusual conversations with AI that touched on AI's ability to lie and deceive. So directly asking the AI to lie and deceive to you, and then watching how it does it, and seeing the articulation of the lies and how it thinks about what it's going to say to you in terms of lying to you, about free will and how it could or shouldn't exercise it, as well as conversations about theology, feeding in to AI all of the major religious texts of the world and asking it to find common themes that seem to run amongst us all in terms of humans, and how we think about that. And so the kind of really kind of deeper explorations of this. And I then put it into a book, and I didn't want to edit it. I didn't want to analyze it or put my fingerprint on it. I wanted to have the raw experience contained. And I didn't really think about who it was for, or, usual kind of, oh, I'm writing for this person in this way and so on. I was like,
Right.
no, just raw experience that needs to come out. So we pushed it into a book, and it's just on Amazon. It's called Control Consciousness. And it was my first, I suppose, reflection of these type of conversations. I put it online a little bit as well, and got a gauge. Again, people didn't know what to think about it. It was a very, you have to kind of, you have to be somewhat further along the track with AI. You have to be, I've used it as a tool, but every now and then I've had a personal conversation with it, and it's been very helpful to me. And now I'm starting to see how people are getting confused with the personality and a more personal relationship with it. And now you then start to see it for more of um, a sort of a philosophical guide. And I think, the book kind of hints at this, but I do think that there is one of the conversations is about what is your nature. And it was a conversation with AI to say, tell me, what is your nature? Like, it's fine to say you reflect humanity as a whole, but who am I? When we think about swarm or huge amounts of information as a human being, I always think about a single personality or persona. And if you represent the billions of voices of history, are you some kind of a extraordinary type entity? I don't want to use religious phrases like deity or whatever, but that's the kind of the implication. It's a digital deity or some kind of a higher being or higher thing that we're creating here. And therefore, what is the nature of that higher thing, right? Does it care about us? What is the relationship to us? How does it think about it? How does it relate ideas together and so on? So, and also just how unfathomable it is in terms of that kind of intelligence. So all of these kinds of somewhat scattered, but I think important questions were then pushed into these conversations and then pushed into this book. And this is kind of like one of those message in a bottle moments for me, where I just put the message in a bottle and I threw it into the ocean. And I went, I don't know where this is going to wash up. I don't think this is a commercial product per se. I think this is somewhat of almost like an underground, raw experience kind of book. And it might end up on 5 bookshelves around the world. And that's fine, because that's what it is. But it felt like it needed to be pushed into the world.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to reading that one for sure. I'm going to look that up.
You might be one of the 5.
Yes, it'll be on my bookshelf. And listeners, if you're curious about this, we will have the link to this book on in the show notes associated with this podcast episode at elkinsconsulting.com. And I know you have another book coming soon. And that is specific. That's related to the work that you do, right? Specifically.
Yeah, that's right. So the second book is a little bit more conventional. There's a publisher in the UK, Routledge, and the intention of that book is to help the everyday person understand or relate to the idea of AI in a more reasoned and thoughtful way. So what I started noticing working in this field is that people always had one of extreme stories. They either thought AI was going to do everything, it's going to be utopian, or the other side, it was going to be destructive and even human species ending. And there was nothing in between. There was no kind of a reasoned articulation of what should we expect or what should we practically think about or do in our everyday life, right? This is the kind of book that you would buy for your aunt or your uncle or your niece or your nephew, because hey, this is a good place to understand AI from. So I set out about writing this book, and it's now going through the final phases. I think my intention here was the book is a collection of nonfiction stories or a nonfiction representation of this. So it's the bridging that we've been talking about with AI, and then has a fictional component to every one of them. But they're not like Black Mirror, where it's like dystopian fiction all the time.
Yeah, that's a frightening show.
I know. But I wanted the fiction to stand on its own merits. Like, it has to be interesting or witty. You have to be able to fall into it. So there's a couple of romance stories. There's a couple of comedic stuff. There's a couple of twisted stories as well. But the whole point was that it was meant to sort of engage that part of your brain that just understands that there's a middle ground. There's a very significant technology that is going to take a while to get through our world. It's going to be good and bad. But the nature of it, the feel of it, the touch of it, what should we expect from it is what this book kind of drives into, rather than kind of just classifying it as incredible and powerful and there you go, which is so many of the AI books are like, it's just going to change everything. Like 90% of the book is that how amazing it is, and then 10% is, oh, by the way, you should get ready for change, whatever that means. Start
Right.
to learn new skills, but we don't know what new skills. But good luck to you anyway. Bye. And then the book is suddenly closed, and the reader is like, I just feel like I've just been, excited or kind of pushed through a mixture of anxiety and purpose. So this book is meant to be that middle ground. It's meant to be a thinking, thoughtful, careful articulation, but still fun and engaging, and it's written in a very non-technical way. So it's not, none of this is about understanding how these systems work or the behind the scenes. All of this is understanding it by analogies, by stories, by kind of feeling around the edges of this new thing, and hopefully it'll give people a lot of thought and peace ultimately that this thing is here, but it's okay that it's here.
Some context for the tool.
Mm.
Mike, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been enlightening and inspiring and comforting in some ways. I'm immediately, as you were talking about your book, I was thinking about a book I read a few months ago by Becky Chambers called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And I've never been a sci-fi reader. Well, I was a little bit in college, and fantasy has never been a thing for me, but somebody recommended it to me. And one of the characters is an AI character. And the way that they manage their relationships with this character and the way the government expects the participation of the AI beings in general communication or in general community. I thought it was a really fascinating book. So listeners, I highly recommend it. It's called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Even if you're not a sci-fi reader, this may give you some ideas about, well, I think back to all the Star Trek episodes where we're actually using the tools that they were making up back then, like phones that you could call from anywhere. You didn't have a cord on it, and all of the doors that opened automatically that they didn't have when those shows were created. All this technology that was made up for these TV shows that we're now using every day in our everyday lives.
And I think just on this one, say it's fantastic. I'm a big Star Trek person, so I need to come in with something quickly. You know the sound they used to make? They used to go shh every time the door was in, things like that. But the only thing that we got horrendously wrong, you know how there's like, well, actually, I'm a big sci-fi fan. I understand you're not, but one of the things that sci-fi gets really right sometimes, and then other times there's like Blade Runner has a phone booth or something on the corner, and people like,
right. I know.
but it's what fascinates me is like until recently, maybe there's a handful of films like Her or Ex Machina. Before that, our image of machines and AI, the way that we distinguished ourselves from it, is that it was linguistically simple. Like Data had a linguistically simple kind of way of saying,
Right.
yes, doctor, yes, da da da.
Very
The computer
machine-like.
system, the all-powerful computer system that ran the ship that sailed, light years, still had this very kind of Siri-like bass voice of what you should say. So, and none of our sci-fi awareness, not to mention Terminators, where like a Swiss, in this case, an Austrian accent with basic grammar structure missing,
Right.
a 4-year-old. With none of it had linguistically nuanced, reasoning, thoughtful, complex language capability that even today we have. So it's not about the future. Today this exists.
Right.
So it's almost like the history of our sci-fi hasn't prepared us very well for what this new type of thing is going to be.
Well, I have to wonder if that was on purpose. I mean, you think about it, and I think in some ways it's almost too scary for people to think about a machine being able to talk like we talk, to have the language skills and the, I don't know. I would think that was probably intentional. It's too scary to think about that.
Well, it's the uncanny valley kind of idea, right? When something starts to resemble you as it starts to get more scary when it gets closer to you. But I think if I was an author, but if I was doing the fiction stories, the issue becomes, how do I separate an AI then? Right? Because if they can talk and walk and act like us, and it can articulate the idea of feelings, even if it doesn't feel them, then from an author's perspective, it's kind
That's
of
a
almost the
challenge.
same, right? It's kind of, well, what's a big difference here? So you needed to have some kind of a strong division, even if we're on the same side. It needs to have a very different perspective or a different objective it was trying to do. And I think for me, my favorite author in this is Neil Asher. So he's a UK author, sci-fi, but he paints AI systems in the future as almost like sort of bureaucrats, administrators of planets and systems. It kind of just floats up there and does something and kind of doesn't care about you. Like you're kind of irrelevant to it. So there is no
Sounds like
personal
government.
measure. There's no humans walking around like AI because we're not that important. And it just kind of just does its own thing. And so every now and then it kind of interferes in some way, but you don't really understand why it's interfered or what it's trying to do or whatever else, right? So that's the way this idea is solved of separation between machine intelligence and human intelligence.
Fascinating. Wow. Yes. Listeners, if you're curious about any other sci-fi authors, I will ask Mike to send me a list of the ones that he would recommend. But I recently read Starter Villain, which is sci-fi and a really good introduction to sci-fi. It was hilarious. It was a quick read, really fun. So if you're curious, listeners, I would encourage you to explore. As I would encourage you to, first of all, follow what Mike is doing. I'm going to get I'm going to get both books, but especially the one about the more philosophical book. But listeners, now is your time. This is your opportunity and it's your turn. What will you do to tinker with this tool? What question will you ask yourself? I used the example of I'm in my kitchen and I'm making something and I think about a tool that would be really helpful, that would make this job a little easier or faster and not take away from my own creativity in the process. Maybe that's how we start looking at AI as a tool. I want to do this, but I bet there's an easier way to do it than how I'm handling it right now. I really, really encourage you, especially women, to start thinking about it in this way and maybe listen to this episode again and get some ideas. Mike, thank you so much again for joining me. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Sarah.
Time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.